What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks for Sports Illustrated over on Fan Nation. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast today, Monday, February 28th. Whether you are watching us live on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres or over on Apple Podcasts, over on Spotify, however you guys are here, we're just happy to have you along to talk some Oregon football as we continue getting closer to spring football. We are going to be talking today about the running backs in our spring football preview. I'm joined today by Ducks Digest reporter Dylan Rubenking. Rube, how we doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
Doing great. I'm always happy to join in. And we're only 10 days out from the first spring practice. Isn't that crazy?
It's wild, man. I mean, I feel like I was really just getting into the flow of basketball a little bit more since they were, covering men and the women. It's quite a bit to juggle. As you know, you've been helping out with that a lot. But I'm excited for football, man. That's what people in Eugene are super, super passionate about. And I think that's, the sport that really has the national attention when it comes to the Ducks right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the new era, with the Dan Lanning era and so much change, primarily at running back is one area we're going to talk about with Dye and Verdell heading out. It's going to be a really exciting time to see what this Oregon program is made of.
No doubt about it. So if you guys are here and you want to hear about some of the other previews that we've done, the only other one we've done so far is quarterbacks, but that one was really fun. And that's, probably the hottest topic right now with Oregon football is that, upcoming quarterback battle. Go ahead and check out, the video on my channel to, get up to speed on the quarterbacks. But we're going to keep it rolling today with the running backs. Oregon loses CJ Verdell. Not a huge surprise to see him declare for the NFL draft and subsequently receive an invite to the scouting combine. He was, really the workhorse for Oregon football, for pretty much his entire college career until he got injured against Stanford last year. And that was a season-ending injury that was tough to see. And then you also have Travis Dye, who worked in tandem with Verdell, as I mentioned. And he was a really dynamic talent, probably one of the most dynamic runners that Oregon's had, seeing the added value that he had in the passing game. So you lose two of those guys. And then, looking into next year, there's a lot of youth, Dylan, but I think still tons of good reason to be excited.
Yeah, I mean, Travis Dye and CJ Verdell, I mean, they're both in the top 10 all time in rushing yards. You're losing, I think, upwards of 5,000 career rushing yards right there. And that's a huge chunk of what they had last year. And just having that veteran presence at the running back group the last couple of years it's not going to be there. Completely new. Byron Cardwell is the number one guy. And Sean Dollars has been there the longest, but of course he's only had a short sample size that we can go off of. But I think there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of unproven talent. I think you could argue that Byron Cardwell has proven what he's capable of, but being the workhorse, being the number one running back, we've yet to see that so far. And I'm really excited to see what this group looks like, because we're still trying to figure out what the Oregon offensive identity is going to look like with Dan Lanning and Kenny Dillingham. They talked about this pro style offense of upwards of 80 plays per game, really fast paced. Is it going to be this kind of physicality, run it down your throat kind of mantra that Mario Cristobal emphasized, or is it going to be this flash and speed that Chip Kelly and Mark Helfrich put forth? So I'm really excited to see how they kind of fit into that equation.
Cardwell is definitely I think the biggest name that people are talking about right now, just because of his body of work from the 2021 season. Just to bring some of his stats to light here, in 14 games, Cardwell carried the ball 61 times for the Ducks for 417 total yards. And that came out to 6.8 yards a pop, which is, some great numbers, Dylan. Only had 3 rushing touchdowns, but, not a huge surprise seeing how Travis Dye really took on a majority of that workload once Dye went down. But I think to your point about Dillingham and kind of what he has revealed a little bit about his plans for the offense, that pro style up tempo. I think it kind of lends me to believe that they're going to be running, with a 2-back set. I know we've talked before kind of about Seven McGee and how I think it would make sense to kind of have him utilized a lot more this year, but maybe we could kind of just start with Cardwell, And, if we have any questions or comments that kind of trickle in the live chat, we definitely want to get you guys involved over there. We can maybe address some of those as they come up. But yeah, let's start off with Cardwell and then kind of work our way through the rest of the room. It is maybe worth noting that as of right now, the Ducks are only going to have 3 scholarship running backs for spring football, with that being those being Byron Cardwell, Sean Dollars, and Seven McGee. And then we'll see if he ends up being used more at wide receiver or running back, or bouncing back between the two. The Ducks lost Cross Patton, who was a former walk-on who followed Ken Wilson to Nevada. And then the Ducks still have Aaron Smith, a walk-on from my hometown of San Jose, which is great. Am I missing anybody else right now? I mean, because I don't think Jordan James is going to be here for the spring, as far as we know right now. I think I maybe need to do a little more digging, but I don't believe I've seen anything that leads me to believe, or that's been reported, that he's going to be here in the spring. So those are kind of some of the main guys that we're going to be working on. But how about you get started, just kind of giving us some of your early thoughts on Cardwell based on what we were able to see from the 21 season?
Sure. I mean, I think Byron Cardwell going into last season was kind of an underthought. Like, a lot of people didn't really think of him as a guy that could be the next this or that. He was pretty quiet going into spring. He had a really good spring and fall camp. It felt like not a lot of people were talking about him. And then early on in the year, early on in that Pac-12 slate, late in the the non-conference schedule, you kind of saw him get some of those carries that maybe people thought Trey Benson would get, and maybe Sean Dollars would get if he had been healthy. And he just kind of took off from there. The Colorado game, I think, was the breakout, where he had like 120 yards on 6 or 7 carries in that long touchdown run. The Washington State game, he had a really good game as well. I just think he's kind of like a complete back from what I've seen so far. He's a combination of Travis Dye and CJ Verdell of sorts. Like, I don't think he has quite the power that CJ Verdell has showed. Obviously, CJ Verdell is like, as powerful a running back as there probably is in this draft class, but he's shown it a little bit. He's got not track speed, but speed that's definitely effective. He's got amazing footwork, amazing vision. Sees the holes. He can really move past defenders. I really think there's a lot of promise, and obviously there's some area to improve. But from his first year, I mean, I don't really know if I saw. Maybe CJ Verdell is the best example of a true freshman coming in and showing what he can do right away, because obviously the running back situation was kind of like what we're seeing now with 2022. In 18 was Verdell's freshman year, and Royce Freeman had moved on. So I feel like it's kind of in that kind of ballpark, and Byron Cardwell, in my opinion, has a chance to do what CJ Verdell did over his career.
Yeah, with Verdell, he got to Oregon in 2017, and he redshirted his true freshman year. But by the time that job came a little bit more open in 2018, he was really ready to roll. And I don't think he missed a step really when that job was kind of up for grabs, and he took hold of it and really took it and ran with it. So with Cardwell, I think another interesting part about him and kind of his transition to the college level is he was a guy who played in a couple spring games in 2021 to kind of finish out his high school season in the spring. So he didn't have the benefit of getting to Oregon early. So maybe that's part of the reason, Dylan, you were talking about him maybe being a little bit of an afterthought. A lot of people, I don't know if they have different opinions on the benefits of early enrollment, but I feel like it's becoming a little bit more of a hot topic just because, with the early signing period, I think some guys feel pressure to get to their next stop early. I'm not saying that was the case with him at Oregon by any means, but it's just another interesting kind of dynamic that we see with today's era of college football. But as far as what he did as a freshman at Oregon, we got to talk to him at the media availabilities a handful of times, and really just liked how he carried himself. Has a great head on his shoulders, and I love the kind of work ethic that he has and the mentality that he has. Just another great young man on this team. And I think we saw that, carry over pretty well onto the field, after CJ got hurt, and, Cardwell really saw, I think, an opportunity to get on the field early, and he took full advantage of every one of his opportunities. That doesn't mean that every game that he played in was, amazing, But you look at that Colorado game that I think really got a lot of people's attention. Like, oh dang, I think this guy could be one of the next Oregon greats. And maybe you don't want to draw those conclusions from just one game, right? But I think that game really caught a lot of people's attention. I'm trying to pull up the stats right now for that game in particular, but it's not quite letting me, so I might need to. Okay, here we go. Against Colorado, let's see, 7 carries for 127 yards and a touchdown. So that was awesome. I really do like the patience that he runs with as such a young back. I think that's one of the parts of the game of football that is a little bit harder to get adjusted to. And he definitely strikes me as a north-south guy rather than an east-west that you see kind of trending a little bit with some speedster running backs now. So I think really liked for everything that I saw from him on the ground. Maybe you ideally would have seen a little bit more of a contribution through the passing game, if you want to call that a knock on him. But I really don't even think you can call it that. It's just something that with the sample size that we have, we just didn't happen to see him utilized a whole lot on the passing plays. And when you look at Travis Dye and how efficient he was, I think it makes a lot of sense. So maybe that's an area that he's going to be focusing on heading into the spring. But out of Oregon's stable of running backs, it probably stands to reason that this is the one that if you're Dan Lanning and this coaching staff, this is the one that you're most confident about right now.
For sure. And I appreciate you correcting me. I forgot that he hadn't come in until the fall. I forgot that he wasn't in there in the spring. But I think one of the things that I remember hearing was, about Byron Cardwell is the fact that he's super patient that you mentioned. And when I was watching him kind of back the last, couple weeks or so, because he's one of those guys that just has a really unique skill set for a freshman running back. And it reminded me a little bit of Le'Veon Bell early on in his career at Michigan State. A lot of people have talked about Le'Veon Bell throughout his career, how he's just super patient, makes really shifty cuts, just kind of waits for the play to develop before he kind of takes over. And, he kind of came in as the same size that Le'Veon Bell did. Early on at Michigan State, around that 6'2", 215 range. And I think Byron Cardwell has a chance to be an every down back. Honestly, you talked about the north-south, impact. I think you definitely saw that this year, but he's a guy that can, put moves on a guy. He's capable of juking guys out of their shoes. And, I was really hoping to see him be a little bit more involved in the passing game too. Only had 4 catches for 3 yards. And you lose a guy like Travis Dye, who I think he was second or third on the team in receptions last year. Of course, there was a lot of the short game last year that they utilized with Anthony Brown, and hopefully that's not kind of a go-to next season with whoever starts at quarterback. But I definitely think you need a running back that has that ability to catch and make plays out of the backfield on a wheel route or whatever it might be. But I think he's capable of being a blocking back. That Mario Cristobal emphasized that for sure. We'll have to see what that looks like with Dan Lanning and Dillingham. But if you're a running back, you definitely got to know how to block. And I think Cardwell's got the frame to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, he absolutely has the frame to, really stick in there and hopefully give the quarterback a little bit more time. Want to talk about Mikey G's comment here on the screen. Mikey G says, everyone says he has patience, and I get it, he does. I just can't wait to describe him using different adjectives because we see more reps from him. And that I feel the exact same way. I think Dylan, you and I were talking before we hit record here, and I said, wow, it's kind of surprising that Cardwell only had 61 carries. So I don't know. It felt like kind of just off the top, I kind of feel like I thought it was more than that just based off of how often we saw him last year. But 61 carries for just a little over 400 yards, I think is what it was. Averages 6.8 yards per carry. So yeah, seeing a bigger sample size is definitely gonna help kind of get a little bit of a better handle on our evaluation of him. But Mikey, I'll throw some other words at you when I'm talking about Cardwell. I think I really like his explosion. When he's coming out of those cuts, I think that's really encouraging to see, especially with how big of a frame he has, to see the kind of wiggle that he has in and out of his cuts and the vision that he has are definitely some encouraging signs from any running back. But especially a guy that we think, we've kind of talked about is capable of being that bell cow back, the every down kind of back. And I talked earlier, just kind of the demeanor that he had to him. I think that was really, really encouraging as well, because maybe that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. I think um, with the running back room and just college football, maybe, you think that someone's going to be able to, if they're really talented and they're a freshman, they're going to be able to come in and have success really like pretty easily. But I think making sure that you have the right kind of a guy and an athlete that knows it's about more than just him. And I mean, that's like one of the biggest things that I think stands out to me about Cardwell, is that he's really a team first guy. Another phrase that gets thrown around a tremendous amount, but after being around him in Eugene and being at the media availabilities, you can tell he's super bought in. Just with how encouraging he was last year, I mean, I'm not, I don't want to say like sky's the limit, but if he has a really, really strong offseason, I mean, I feel really confident about him being, one of the top contributors for this Oregon rushing attack next year.
You talked about his demeanor, and I think a prime example of that was at the end of the year before the Bowl, before they took off. They were asking him about his, kind of if he was locked in with the new coaching staff and how he was kind of affected by the coaching change, with the game still left to play. And he was completely bought in. He just said, look, I'm here to get better. I'm here to, just work on what I can control. And he's just, he's one of those guys that just kind of puts his head down and works and does whatever is asked of him. And I think, I'm really excited to see him get more carries, because last season, the only time he had double-digit carries was against Washington at 16 carries for 55 yards. And of course, against that Washington secondary, they were just, that was the game plan from the start, was just to run it down their throat. And they did that with Travis Dye primarily, but they used Cardwell a little bit for that too. And I was really kind of disappointed at the end of the year that we didn't get to see more of him when the games were a lot bigger. Like against Utah in the Pac-12 championship game, he only had 1 carry for 2 yards. In the Alamo Bowl, had 6 carries for 17 yards. I was hoping to see him get utilized a little bit more, just because Verdell was already out. You didn't really know if Travis Dye was going to go to the NFL or the transfer portal. I'm kind of on the same train that I was with, starting Ty Thompson over Anthony Brown. I feel like using Byron Cardwell toward the end of the year in those big games would have set you up a little bit more in the future. And having 7 carries combined in those 2 games just didn't really sit right with me. But overall, I think I'm pretty comfortable with him being the number 1 guy after what we saw kind of in that early stretch against Colorado, Washington State, and even that Washington game.
Yeah, and maybe it goes without saying, but I wanted to just mention, Dylan, that I think, similar to the quarterback situation, we're not saying that, the competition's over. Like, we think these guys are going to be handed the job. But I think you and I are on the same page, just as far as, based on the body of work that we saw from Cardwell, it makes sense that we think he's probably one of the better options for this roster right now. He's ran behind this offensive line. He's gotten some good reps. But this room is really capable, and there are a lot of, intriguing options right now. So that's why we're going to keep working our way through these guys as we kind of work our way down the list. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with Cardwell, or can we move on to our next guy?
I'm just excited he's wearing number 21. I love seeing an Oregon running back in 21. Everybody's going to make the comments about LaMichael James and Royce Freeman. Maybe it's time to throw Byron Cardwell's name in there by the end of this year, because I feel like CJ Verdell, when he had that really good freshman year and then bounced back, had a huge 2019. I feel like that's where a lot of the expectation is going to be on Byron Cardwell, is that kind of jump to be maybe a 1,000-yard rusher. And Oregon's seen no shortage of running backs wearing 21 going over 1,000 yards.
He's got the offensive line to help him get there. That's without a doubt. We want to keep going on through our running back preview here for spring football. That's just about 10 days away, like we said on the top from Dylan. So let's talk about Stephen McGee. He's a guy that, from a carry standpoint, he ranked 5th last year with just 14 carries for 61 yards and averaged 4.4 yards a carry and had 1 touchdown, averaging less than 5 yards a game. But it's not super surprising just when you look at how much he ultimately got used. But I think what has me so excited about him is, just like Cardwell, I want to see more usage of him. I think with all the veterans that they had on last year's roster, you just didn't have enough opportunities to really get him involved. Saw him get a little more involved towards the end, particularly at wide receiver, kind of doing some work out of the slot after the Ducks saw some attrition at the wide receiver spot due to injuries and transfers. We kind of all know how that shook out. But, you hear about the DeAnthony Thomas comparisons, which I mean, quite frankly, I don't think we've seen enough of him to see if that's a legitimate comparison, but I think we've seen enough to see why people maybe say that and why there's so much excitement around him, because if you even look at his high school highlights, he was really doing it all, like regardless of what was asked from him. He even came over the top playing safety, delivering some big hits, had some really impressive catches as a wide receiver or just working out of the backfield, catching the ball. So I think that he's a guy that I think I'm really excited for, just because of the opportunity to get him more involved and to get creative with him as an offensive weapon. We know, especially in Dillingham's first year as offensive coordinator. And that's he's going to be a big part of a piece that I want to work on here this week, just talking about why now is the time for kind of an offensive innovation. I don't know if I want to say overhaul, because clearly there were things that worked from last year, but with the new staff, the youth of Kenny Dillingham, the new weapons here, how much they were underutilized, the ones that were here last year, I think that's kind of along the lines of what I'm saying. And Seven McGee, I think, is going to play a huge part in that for this team.
For sure. I remember tweeting, I think it was before the Pac-12 championship game, or maybe it was the Alamo Bowl. I'm not 100% sure, but I think, actually, now I think about it, I think it was the Pac-12 championship, because my point in that tweet was something about how Oregon had kind of unloaded something new in each of the last couple Pac-12 championship games. I like that comparison. Yeah, Kenyon Barner. With 2019, you kind of saw, Justin Herbert running the ball. That was new. 2020 in the Pac-12 championship, Anthony Brown, coming in all of a sudden and, providing a spark for the Oregon offense that was really struggling. I felt like Seven McGee was going to be that guy that was just going to come out and just tear it up in that Pac-12 championship game, because the offense really needed that spark. Especially against Utah, a defense that had really figured out the Oregon offense. I feel like Seven McGee is one of those guys that it just doesn't come around very often, because like you said, he can do a little bit of everything. He's a phenomenal receiver, just has crazy good speed, really good vision. A lot of guys just don't come around that often. And when you have a guy wearing an Oregon uniform like that can do those kinds of things, yeah, you're going to see the DeAnthony Thomas, the Kenyon Barner, Taj Griffin, those kind of comparisons, because they just have this crazy speed. And I don't like to throw around the next X and the next Y, but I feel like he's a guy that can be utilized like Jalen Redd was, where, you can just throw him around anywhere on the field and he can just go. And I feel like Seven McGee is just kind of this X factor that people have been forgetting about, because, we've been on the Byron Cardwell hype train. We've been on, the Dante Thorntons, the Chris Hudsons, the Troy Franklins, the tight ends. Seven McGee, I feel like, has just been this guy that's been kind of underneath, and we've just been kind of sleeping on him because of, like you said, we haven't really seen too much of what he can do. And as a punt returner, as a slot receiver, as a running back, no matter what, I think he's a guy that will make this Oregon offense fun to watch again and, make some defensive coordinators scratch their heads a little bit.
You have a great point there, just with the added value that he has in the return games as well. And just with how little, how small of a sample size we saw last year, it kind of feels like he's that lightning in a bottle kind of weapon for the Ducks on this 2022 roster, just moving him around. And I think he's really effective and efficient and, in terms of just being a guy that can make the most out of his touches. And, if he has a little bit of a sliver of space, I think he'll be able to, burst through there and gain some yards. So I think that's definitely an encouraging sign for Seven and kind of what his role could be in this 2022 team, on this 2022 team. Maybe we kind of see him and Cardwell, being that, lightning and thunder kind of a deal. There was something else that I wanted to say, but I couldn't quite remember what the point was. I think just basically talking about how I think he looks like a guy that I think could really complement Cardwell's play style and just getting him more involved. I like what you talked about with Jalen Redd, getting him more involved on sweeps and screens. If you have some tight ends, which Oregon definitely does, that are really capable of blocking, and a great offensive line. I think that's going to be one of the things that I want to look at with these wide receivers. Can they block like last year's wide receivers? Because I think that was an element of last year's offense that was pretty underrated. Even though they did see a lot of screenplays and all that, I think that'll be a pretty big factor in just seeing how effective this offense can be. So maybe if they do have, that good perimeter blocking, we'll be able to see a guy like Seven McGee utilized a lot on some screens. But if I'm looking at Travis Dye's production last year, how versatile he was, the added value in the passing game out of the backfield, I think Seven McGee, the blueprint's been there. It's there. I think if you look at Travis Dye's season last year and how he got involved, maybe not so much as an every down kind of guy. I'm not saying that he's not capable of that, but I don't think that you're in the position where you need to have him as an every down guy. So maybe getting him involved in a similar role to Travis Dye, who was incredibly productive for the Ducks during his time in Eugene, could be a good starting point.
Yeah, to your point about blocking, I feel like Johnny Johnson and Jalen Redd are going to be two of the best blocking receivers, in the NFL draft, just because you don't see a lot of guys that can just maul people on the outside like that. That's one thing I really loved about Joe Moorhead and Mario Cristobal was, if you're a wide receiver or if you're a running back, tight end, doesn't really matter. Of course, we want you to be able to, catch the ball and be exciting on offense, but you gotta get down and dirty and block too. And Seven McGee has a smaller frame, but I feel like he's got some fight to him. But yeah, I mean, to your point about to his utilization on the offense, I'm really wondering if they're going to convert him to receiver, because of course there was talks last year about he's practicing as a slot receiver, as kind of that Z guy. I'm really wondering if there's going to be a full-time switch, because there is kind of a need at running back. Like you said, there's only a couple of scholarship running backs that are going to be there in spring, and Seven McGee is one of those. And if you split him over to wide receiver, I think that need at running back is a little bit more dire than at wide receiver. But of course, wherever you put him, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife of sorts. And I feel like no matter what, he's going to be lined up as a receiver or running back, no matter what he's listed on Go Ducks website. I just think you're going to see him do a little bit of everything. But I think in terms of what this roster needs, what this offense needs, I think he's probably better suited as a running back, as maybe running back 2 or 3. But at receiver, I don't think you can go wrong. Because one thing that I'm remembering is there was a catch, I believe, against Arizona where they had him, lined up out wide, if I'm remembering correctly. And Brown kind of put him in stride and he made out, he kind of dove for a really nice catch. And you talked about his high school tape. He can make plays in the passing game. So I think no matter where you put him, he's going to be really effective.
With the Seven McGee and, kind of my stance on how he should be used, just get the guy on the field. I think, he'll get involved in a variety of ways, just based off of what we saw last year, but definitely get him on the field, get him the ball. He said as much himself, this last year when people were asking him about, returning, kind of his thoughts on that, and, getting some slot work as well. That was one of the things that was actually a theme before, all of the attrition that they saw, was that he was really just trying to get running back down and then hoping for some slot work kind of here and there. But now you're at the point as an offense where you just want to get the best guys on the field and then get them the ball as many times as possible, because, like when Troy Franklin, for example, was utilized downfield, like we saw how beneficial that was. And then like Dante Thornton finally got the ball. No, I shouldn't say finally, but he got the ball for his first collegiate touch against Stony Brook, and you saw what happened. So
I would say finally.
If nothing else, it's really just the opportunities. I just want to see the opportunities there. Like, for last year, I think one of the biggest frustrations with the offense was that these guys just weren't given chances. A lot of the younger wideouts, and that's probably one of the biggest things that I want to see. Like, they could have, poor statistical games, but like if they have, 6 or 7 targets or something like that, I just want to see them get that chance, because it felt criminal to see these guys not have an opportunity last year. Don't want to get into the receivers too much, but I guess kind of the conversation bled over because we might be seeing Seven McGee kind of go that route a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of diamonds in the rough, even though, of course, some of those guys are like 4 or 5 star guys, but um, they're just kind of waiting for their chance. And now that a lot of the veterans have moved on, I think it's time for guys like Byron Cardwell and Seven McGee and Troy Franklin, Dante Thornton. We'll talk about them in another stream, I'm sure. But it's time for the future of Oregon's playmakers. Their time's now.
Got a question again from Mikey G. Since we're talking returners, any sense if Jaleel Florence gets any chances back there? Yeah, I think that if you're looking at the roster right now, you have Seven who got a little bit of time back there last year, and then you also have Chris Hudson. He's another person who's been utilized in the return game a little bit, but I don't see why you wouldn't. I mean, if you have that track speed, you might as well try to kind of test him out and get him more involved. I think there was a report saying that he was going to be joining Oregon for spring football, so I think that'd be a great time to try to get him a little bit more involved back there. And like I said, I mean, if I'm this Oregon coaching staff, I'm kind of just trying everybody out and seeing who gives me the best 11 on any given play.
Yeah, I think Jaleel Florence and Jaleel Tucker are two guys I really, really want to see back there. Even Kamari Terrell, I feel like he's got that track speed too. Any of those guys, you could put out there. But of course, you don't want to just put all of these bodies and just, have it be a mishmash of guys and see what you have. I feel like what they have right now and what they know they have is Seven McGee and Chris Hudson. Chris Hudson, I think, has been doing it the past 2 years. We saw it a little bit at the end of 2020 where he was returning kicks. And Seven McGee, I feel like, is probably the most explosive guy that they would have. But Florence, I'd be super comfortable putting him back there. Jaleel Tucker as well. But I feel like where you're probably going to see them most to start, at least in the spring, is on special teams as gunners, because they're short tacklers. They're super fast. Like that's where you can really see guys like that shine, because Javon Holland and Brady Breeze are a couple guys I'm thinking of that. You saw them make plays in special teams, and then it trickled over to, to the defensive side. Brady Breeze more so because he wasn't really getting a lot of snaps on defense, and then, made a lot of huge game-changing plays on special teams and found his way on defense. Jaleel Florence and Tucker, they had more talent, I think, a lot more reps on defense that is kind of a plug-and-play thing than Brady Breeze was, I think. As big of a fan of Brady Breeze as I am, I feel like Florence and Tucker are more, day one kind of starting capability. But in terms of special teams, if they can't find their spot in the secondary right away, yeah, put them as returners or gunners. I'd love to see it.
Both Florence and Tucker are just absolute playmakers at the end of the day. Maybe Tucker a little bit more so, I want to say, just because I think there was more of a legitimate conversation in his recruitment about playing wide receiver at the next level. Not so much with Oregon, but when I was talking to him during his recruitment, he was saying, that's kind of why Florida State was one of my finalists, because they were more open to getting him involved as a wide receiver. But that's another kind of aspect of this 2022 team that, adds to the excitement is I don't want to say, renewal of speed, because obviously last year's team had speed on it, but like I feel like it's being prioritized in a different way with this 2022 roster at a variety of positions. So that's definitely part of the reason we're excited about, spring football and kind of seeing a little bit of what Dan Lanning and company have in store with this team. Probably going to be going for around another 10 minutes or so. And we have a couple more guys that we want to get into here on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. So we'll, turn the page a little bit and talk about our next guy right after this ad break. Stay with us. All right. We are back on the Ducks Dish podcast with our spring football preview for the Oregon Ducks. And these last two guys that we want to hit on, we know at least one of them is going to be here in the spring, and that is Sean Dollars. Sean Dollars is a guy that comes with a tremendous amount of upside, but also, as it stands right now, a lot of unknown. He came to Oregon in the 2019 class. Excuse me. I'm pretty sure it's 2019. Came out of Modern Day after transferring from Rancho Cucamonga. But in the spring of last year, he had a pretty serious injury. So unfortunately, wasn't able to play and see the field at all in 2021. But I think he's kind of a guy that reminds me a little bit more so of Seven McGee, just in terms of his versatility. Maybe not as quick or as fast as Seven McGee, but I mean, the you look at his highlight tape from high school, and you see why the coaching staff, really any coaching staff, would be excited to work with him. Really only saw one flash with him, one good sample size, I should say, against USC in that Pac-12 championship game. But he's saying that he's healthy and he's ready to go, and hopefully he can take a step in the right direction, with this spring football under the new staff.
I remember in 2019, his freshman year, he had had to be like a 60 or 70 yard run against Montana, I think. And I mean, that year, yeah, it was 2019 was his first year. I had a class or two with Sean Dollars, and I remember seeing him around campus, and he's listed at 5'10", 171. I don't know about that. He's a bit bigger than 5'10", 171, I think. I'm 6'3". I feel like he's a little taller than that. I think he's closer to 6 feet. And with the strength and conditioning program that Oregon's got, I feel like you could see him be a bit bulkier going into this spring. But I was there for the USC game, the Pac-12 championship game, and there were a couple of drives where you saw him kind of just take control. And it wasn't a guy who was going to rip off 20-yard runs like you saw with Byron Cardwell. Not a crazy explosive guy like you see with Seven McGee, but he's a guy that can get it done. And I feel like once he gets out there and healthy, and just, gets those touches, I feel like he can really go. He's a guy who's really shifty, has a little bit of power to him as well, really sees the field well. I'm just really excited to see him be healthy for once. Last year, I feel like his game would have been a really good compliment off the bench to Dye Verdell. I felt like he was going to do what Byron Cardwell did last year. It never came to be with that injury. Do you know what that injury is? I don't think Cristobal ever really said what that was. I'm curious, because if it's like something like a knee, I'm a little concerned, but he's had a lot of time to recover.
Let me see here. I know that I wrote it here. There's a story that I wrote on it. Let me see though. Hold on. Because I know details were hard to come by during the Cristobal era. So I'm looking at my story that I wrote from April 5th, 2021. And Cristobal said that it was, quote, a pretty significant leg injury. So that's a little vague, just because the leg has, so many different parts. So I'm seeing another report said it was a knee injury, but I need to do a little more research on that before confirming. So pretty significant leg injury is what we got out of Cristobal. And, didn't get a whole lot of new details as the season kind of wound down, because there was some hope that he was going to be ready to go at the end of last season, or maybe in the postseason, with that obviously being a bowl game. But that'll probably be one of the questions that we definitely want to, hone in on when spring football gets underway.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I do remember Cristobal saying we could see him mid-November. That had to have been pretty early in the season. And then he was saying maybe the postseason. And then I just don't think he ever got asked about him again. But if he suffered that injury back in April or maybe prior to that, and, they felt comfortable enough to say we could see him back in mid-November and toward the postseason, I feel like he's probably as close to healthy as you can get right now, just because it's been almost a full calendar year, I would imagine, since that injury. So I feel like he's probably going to show up in spring and be healthy. I feel like he's got a chance to be that running back too. Because we don't know what Seven McGee's role is going to look like. I feel like Sean Dollars has, only 15 carries to his name, but I feel like we've seen enough of his ability at the college level to kind of take command of a drive and be a guy for at least a drive. I feel like Cardwell and Sean Dollars is going to be maybe the Dye and Verdell thunder and lightning combo that we've seen for the last 3-4 years.
Just a little bit of notes here on Sean Dollars coming out of high school, because like we said, we haven't seen too much of him at the college level. This is from Brendan Huffman back in the fall of 2018. So that would have been Dollars' senior year. So Brendan Huffman, national recruiting editor for 247 Sports, described Dollars as Dollars is quicker than fast, showing initial quickness at the line of scrimmage and ability to make defenders miss while showing some elusiveness, but top end speed lacks. runs with power and good vision, and is a plus receiver out of the backfield, competitive and tough, projects as a Power 5 level starter and a third-round NFL draft pick or undrafted free agent. So want to say that's obviously pretty dated at this point, but I think Brandon does a lot of great work over there at 247. So he's a guy that I respect and value his opinion when it comes to things like that. So Dollars has obviously changed a lot. I think since he got to college, his body's changed since getting to the college level, and he has some experience now on that during that 2020 season. With the Ducks, but you got to figure that he's rearing to go, and he's going to be, one of the hungriest guys in that room, just seeing that he's coming off that injury. And it really feels like it's completely wide open. We talked about Cardwell's having the body of work, but I think if on this new staff, you kind of have to take, a fresh perspective at this room and, give everybody a fair shot. And Dollars is definitely a guy I'm super excited about.
I feel like he's going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder just because, you saw him on Twitter talking about I'm healthy, I'm ready to go. It was like my first major injury, look at my body of work kind of thing from high school. I believe he entered the transfer portal like 2-3 times and then came back, after talking with the coaching staff, I'm sure. So I love that he's bought in. I love that he's defending himself. And, like you said, he's rearing to go. I'm sure he's one of the hungriest guys in that entire locker room to get out there and compete.
No doubt, man. Well, there's one more guy we can talk about a little bit. Jordan James, the 2022 Oregon running back signee after he flipped from Georgia. Like I said, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to talk about him right now because as of right now, we don't. It doesn't look like he's going to be on campus for spring football. So maybe it makes more sense to get a guy like Aaron Smith a little bit more involved. And he was definitely one of the talks of fall camp. Just when Master was talking about kind of how some of the walk-on guys when Cross Patton was here and then Aaron Smith, have been pleasant surprises. And I think that every time I saw him in whether it be the spring game or fall camp scrimmages, I think that he's going to be a guy to watch for sure. But I mean, Jordan James probably with him coming in late, probably not an ideal situation from a competition standpoint, but like to my last point, just about kind of having a fresh perspective and giving everybody a shot. I don't think it's going to be a bad thing necessarily that he might be getting here, a little late.
Yeah, one guy that I wanted to talk about, I'm glad you brought him up, is Aaron Smith. And just because he had a really good, I believe it was fall camp, spring camp, probably both. I know there was one where they talked about him a little bit more though. I think it was spring because I think Jim Mastro, if I remember right, he called him like a pleasant surprise just because I think he was added to the roster a little bit later, at least the GoDucks.com roster. And he just kind of came in there and was making a lot of noise. And a lot of the guys on offense and Jim Mastro, they were talking about him pretty often when they were asking about guys that were standing out. I feel like he's one of those guys that should Jordan James not come in the spring and, maybe Sean Dollars isn't quite ready to go, which I anticipate he will be. But, maybe if there's some sort of setback, Aaron Smith is a guy that I feel pretty comfortable, maybe seeing as a running back 3 or 4 guy. I know he's a walk-on, but I really like his size. I really like what I've heard about him. You don't have Cross Patton and Trey Benson. They're both gone. I feel like a lot of it behind Byron Cardwell from what we've talked about and just his experience. I feel like everything behind him is really wide open just because it's guys that have injuries, guys that are, coming in from the high school ranks like Jordan James. And then there's a couple guys that have just been, kind of around like Aaron Smith. And Aaron Smith is one of those guys that's got a lot of potential too. So I feel like you could hear him talked about quite a bit again in the spring. I'm really excited to see if he kind of makes a name for himself and maybe finds a spot in the rotation.
One more question we wanted to hit on talking about Jordan James. Question says, I have to wonder if Jordan James was promised early playing time to try to pry him away from from UGA, or was he just more connected or loyal to Lanning? Yeah, I think with this, I think it's kind of part of the narrative around recruiting is promised playing time. I mean, I haven't talked to Jordan James, so I can't really comment on that part as far as the pitch that he was given, to ultimately end up signing with the Ducks. But I think, playing time is certainly something that I think you could use to your advantage if you're the Ducks and you're saying, hey, we lost, two of our top running backs that have really been running the show for the past couple of years. So if you were to come to Oregon, the competition is going to be as wide open as it's ever been, which I really think has kind of been a common thread in this discussion here on this episode of today's pod, Dylan. So yeah, I don't want to say that he was promised playing time because I don't really think that any school is promising that unless, you're maybe like a smaller school that is looking like to really swing above your weight class potentially. So as far as that goes, I mean, we know how big the Lanning connection was, and then also Carlos Lachlan, that connection was pretty big as well, from his time kind of in that area of the country. So Jordan James is a guy that we've talked about quite a bit on this podcast, especially during like our signing day recap. He was a little bit of the fireworks that the Oregon Ducks were able to get here in the 2022 class, but certainly a guy that we're really excited to see once he gets here to Eugene.
Yeah, even if he's not contributing right away in the spring, like we said, Byron Cardwell came in the fall, and they're not going to make decisions in the spring about who's going to be running back 1, 2. Like they're definitely not going to have that figured out after spring. So, he's not going to lose his spot or anything if he doesn't come in the spring. But I feel like once he does get there, I feel like he's a guy that you can't sleep on either, just because for a guy to be committed to Georgia for that long and have so many top programs looking at him, he just kind of came out of nowhere. I remember you were talking about, in terms of going to Oregon. I remember you talking about like Oregon was looking at this kid from their guy that's committed to Georgia and had been for a while. And I honestly didn't really think there was a chance they could get him just because he had been committed to Georgia for so long. And I think he was telling some outlets that he was going to sign. And then, sure as heck, he comes in and signs on National Signing Day with Oregon. And I feel like he's a guy that's really, really talented, kind of fits the mold of Oregon running backs. And whenever he comes in, I'm excited to see what he can do. I just don't think he's going to be a guy who probably gets as much of a load like Byron Cardwell did last year as a freshman. But you never really know. I like the talent that he's got. And, he's showed a lot of promise on the high school tape. If you watch some of his high school highlights, he's a D1 running back. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time for him to, maybe get into the rotation.
Love the running style with Jordan James and the physicality that he plays with. That'll be all the time we have for today's episode of the podcast, you guys. But before we get out of here, Dylan, where can people find more of you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at DOK Sports News. You can also find my work all over Ducks Digest, Max will plug where you can find all of that. And I'm also working with the Transfer Portal CFB. I have a lot of new people on staff. We're pumping out a lot of really good content, including something my buddy Liam did about, Brian Kelly versus Dabo Swinney, who's the cringier head coach. So go check that out and, speak your mind on that.
Right on. Well, if you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports, that name right there on your screen. You guys want to find more of our Oregon Ducks coverage, you can head on over to ducksdigest.com. We're doing our thing every day covering the Ducks. Going to start rolling out some more spring previews. Already have the quarterbacks up there, like I mentioned. Definitely, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, go ahead and do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. It is a tremendous help, and it only takes a second out of your day. Also, if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're listening to it on, podcast form, definitely go over and give us a good review over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That's a huge help as well. But I could go on and on about, plugging all the other platforms that we have. But those are some of the biggest ones. And we're going to keep rolling out those previews in the future as we work our way towards spring football. For Dylan Rubenking, I'm Max Torres. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Appreciate the support, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Take care.